Post-lunch sessions. I hope you've all had good food and everyone's feeling well nourished and well rested. How's it been so far today? Yeah? Good. Lots of things to think about. We're about to give you even more to think about now. So this afternoon, this session, you're very lucky this afternoon, but two very interesting speakers this afternoon with two quite specific case studies around the use of AI. So as we know, artificial intelligence is more and more coming into our lives and our work. So the session is really trying to think about the use of AI and algorithms in learning. With any luck, what you will hear, I'm looking at both of you two, with any luck what you will hear will be useful and informative. What we're going to need from you all is questions. So as Sue is talking and as Martin is talking, have a really good think about what your questions are. What is it that they're saying? What's kind of throwing up questions for you? Let's go to that growth mindset that Matthew Syed was talking about this morning and see what questions you've got. So I'm relying on all of you to make this session even better than it's going to be with the questions that you throw out. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sue to begin with. So she is going to kick us off this afternoon.
Thanks, Julie. Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good. So my name is Sue Campbell. I'm here today from Montreal. I'm the head of learning and development for Merck in Canada. So outside of North America, Merck is known as MSD, so we're a large pharmaceutical company. I've been in this industry, the pharmaceutical industry that is, for about just over 20 years, and about half of that has been in and out of the learning and development space. So I keep coming back to it, which probably illustrates the love that I really have for it, right? So we're here to talk about artificial intelligence and personalized learning. And one of the biggest guiding principles for me when we're talking about personalized learning is we need to be able, as learning and development teams, to adapt our offerings in a way that respects our learners' knowledge and experience. Okay, this is what guides a lot of what I do, so we can keep coming back to this. The cornerstone, I'll give you a little bit of a background as to how we got to where we are within our case within personalized learning. So instructor-led training, or ILT, has really been the standard for most of our trainings. We would hire someone new to role. We would bring them into a centralized learning space for a couple of weeks, and that would be their training. We all know as learning and development professionals, that's not really how adults learn, but it is a really efficient way to conduct your training because it respects a lot of elements of the execution, right? You're making sure everybody's getting the same kind of information, and it also respects a certain amount of compliance needs. So it has its purposes for sure, but is it the most effective way to learn? So one of the big things that instructor-led training really lacks is the ability to adapt to a learner's knowledge and experience. So in the ideal situation, what we want to come up with is adaptive learning that does just this. So we attempted to do this prior to engaging with technology. We would create vast self-directed learning journeys, and we would have a new employee with their manager determine which pieces they really needed. For example, if there's a project management component to their role, but they have tremendous experience in that, maybe they just sit that one out. Again, what that really lacks is there's a lot of subjectivity in how people are going to make their own decisions. I'm sure lots of people have done psychometric testing, right? We've all done that at some point. There's always a little surprise, right? We know ourselves really well, but we don't always have that level of objectivity we need when we're assessing our own skills and gaps. So the other piece that's always been really important, we know in the learning and development space, measurement of our learning and the skills of our employees is kind of a holy grail, right? So whatever we can do to make our reporting and our measurement of our learning gaps more robust is going to be very appreciated. So because of the elements in us developing our own self-directed learning journeys, we wanted to start looking at different technologies that we could partner with that would bring that objective aspect to a self-directed learning journey, okay? The other thing that we wanted to do, and this was talked about in one of the earlier talks today, is you don't think when we're partnering with a vendor, we don't want to just rely on the vendor for absolutely everything. We need to evolve our own knowledge in this space. So really having an appreciation of what a tech company was going to be able to do for us. So we really wanted a true partner, right? So that was the biggest priority for us. Somebody we felt really comfortable with, somebody who was going to help our organizational knowledge in this space. So the company we partnered with is Sana Labs, and some of you may have heard of them. They're about 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old, and we've been partnering with them for about a year now. We worked in a couple of different spaces with them in terms of skills, in terms of disease knowledge, but the most robust case study we have is in the disease knowledge space. And there are a bunch of people from Sana downstairs if you want to find out more from them as well. So when we talk about personalization and the future of learning, so there was a talk earlier that can technology truly give us a personalized experience? And I think that's actually a really complicated question, because it really depends on the subject matter that you're looking at. If I take, like Martin and I were talking about this earlier, if you're talking about a lot of skills or competencies, that can be very different than when you're dealing with something like disease state, which is truth, right? It's black and white. So we're able to personalize our learnings in the product and disease space really very efficiently. So what we found as well is the level of engagement. We started launching this particular pathway. Let's say we have a disease program. The aforementioned 2 weeks you would bring somebody in to do their training, right? That's roughly, let's say 25 hours worth of training. You're giving everyone exactly the same training. Say you join the company, you have experience in the disease state, so you don't need exactly the same path in your learning as I would if I had no experience. So the 25-hour curriculum that is suited to a new person becomes, let's say, 16 hours for you, because you'll have assessments at the beginning. You'll go through those assessments and it'll determine what pieces of the curriculum you actually need to take. Okay? So measures, right? The holy grail of measurement in learning and development. What we're able to do actually with this is, one, we save a lot of time, right? The programs that we run with this technology, if we gauge from the traditional instructor-led training, we save about 60% of people's time in their learning plans, which helps to increase the engagement of the employees, because they're only going through the parts of the curriculum that they don't know, or they don't have a level of mastery in. Okay? We're able to do assessments on the learning that's taking place as well, or we're able to truly dig into learning gaps. Let's say there's a particular part, we can pull all the reporting in the background is really robust, so we're able to pull content from the back end that's going to be able to tell us an area that's really not well understood, and alternatively, areas that have a tremendous amount of mastery. Okay. So in responding to our learners' needs, we've had a lot of success with this program, and when I'm talking about disease state, for example, we use Net Promoter Scores as a level of engagement, and for the first course that we ran with this program, our Net Promoter Score was 94, which, okay, that speaks to a couple things. Yes, the technology is excellent, but I think moving from a 2-week in-person training to a more adapted for your individual needs, you're going to have a lot more engagement with that as well. And we know when we're addressing needs that employees have and we're tailoring our learning to them, they're feeling more involved in their own growth, their own development and role, and this can have an aspect of retention. And it's an interesting case study that we do with HR as well, to sort of say we're able to provide more engaging learnings to our employees. Cool. So that's our case study. I'm happy to go into more detail with anybody afterwards, totally fine, but for here, I'll hand it over to Martin.
You're welcome. Everyone okay?
Yeah.
Everybody here?
Am I?
Right. So my name is Martin Peart. I work for GSK in our consumer healthcare division. Been in learning and development for probably about 10 or 15 years. My background is more in technical skills for most of that. Working on SAP deployments, and I changed about 5 years ago into a more broad L&D role. And as part of that, I've done hopefully an interesting piece of work which I'd like to talk to you about today, which is really around how I used data and AI to help understand people's needs from a skills perspective, and that's both now and in the future. So a little bit of context, first of all. As a company, we launched a strategy around what we term modern employer, and that was really about employee health and wellbeing, diversity, equity and inclusion, and also development for all. And the development for all component is the piece I was working on, and that was termed Keep Growing. We like a brand, obviously, in corporates, and that was really around shifting accountability for development onto the individual. Again, I'm sure most people in here are doing something similar within their organisations. There was also the broader context around skills transformation. So we know that we need people to reskill faster. We're having to make decisions around how we support that from a company perspective. And I also had feedback that we were starting to hear from our engagement survey, where people were telling us as a function that they couldn't find the development resources that they wanted to be able to use to help them develop to be able to perform their role. And on top of that, when I came into the role, there was we were spending a lot of money, frankly, and that was both from a content suite and also from the amount of time it takes to actually support the content suite that we were delivering to people. When we had, if I think back, we had LinkedIn Learning, Get Abstract, we had the full suite of Harvard, like probably 2 or 3 different platforms. I couldn't fully understand it as a development professional, so I kind of struggled to see how our learners would be able to navigate through that as well. So I wanted to first of all focus on the right skills. So what skills do we actually want our people to be focusing on? What do they need to be focusing on as well? I had a framework that hadn't been looked at in probably about 7 years. It was really quite out of date with my subjective opinion that to be explored, and that's what it looked like to me. And we were also about to implement a new experience platform, again in response to people not being able to find the content that they wanted to help them develop. After looking at the skills, it was then really about understanding, okay, so what should our approach be from a content perspective, and who are the right vendors that we need to be able to support that. And finally, Sue touched on this a little bit as well, engagement was something I wanted to try and do something a little bit differently around. I kind of feel like in various roles I've done, you do something, launch it, tell people about it, and it's kind of pre-mixed from a success perspective. So I was very keen to understand how we could do that a little bit differently. First of all, from a skills perspective, a couple of different lenses I put on the approach that I took. I was interested to know, from an organisational perspective, what does the business want people to be focusing on from a skills perspective? That was interesting to me. I was also interested to see what that meant from a team level. We're a massive company, we had 100,000 people. So when you start boiling that down to business units and teams within that, that's also interesting lenses to put on that. And also then what are individuals wanting to develop in? So what do I think I need as an individual? Where do I want to put my areas of focus from a development perspective as well? Additional lenses, what can I find internally that tells me the answer to some of that, and what is available externally as well. And what do people need now, and what might they need in 3 or 5 years' time? So the kind of different lenses and different cuts that I thought I wanted to take. And just to give some tangible examples, and this is hopefully some helpful examples of how I would do that. The first thing I did was I looked at our workday system. In our mind, just over 100,000 development items that were held in there, obviously all anonymised. Working with our data analytics team, we were able to look at what are the key skills that are showing up in people's development items, which was really insightful and gave me a view at that organisational level, business unit level, and team level. I was also then starting to look at and think about how can I find out what people wanted to develop in. at the moment from their behaviour. And part of that was starting to look at consumption of existing content. So what are people actually looking at when they're going into our platforms? How long are they looking at it for? What types of content do people need? Is there different types of content for different parts of the business? And starting to pull some of that information through as well. And again, partnering with our internal analytics team as well as the suppliers that we work with to have a bit of a better understanding around that. Thinking more broadly than that, I was then interested to look at the organisational development. We've started doing work around strategic capabilities. We're probably quite immature in what we're doing. We're only maybe a couple of years out in terms of what we're actually looking at. But that's starting to tell me about that future lens. What do we think we're going to need people to be able to do in the future? What does that mean then from a skills perspective that we might need them to focus on? And finally, starting to look externally. How can I use external data points to be able to help me understand what we might need now and in the future? Again, some tangible examples of that. Gartner and McKinsey, the usual publications that you would go to will give you some of that. I also started to work with a partner called Filtered. And Filtered have got quite an interesting expertise area in that they've got amazing analytics and insight capability, but they've also got a lot of experience around skills. And they were able to give me some sample matrices around skills, which were useful. And also we were able to help me bring all of these massive data points together to be able to put that together and say, actually, this is what we think our skills framework needs to be at this point based on all of that data. So really, really useful to do. I think after that comes the bit around making decisions. What skills do we want in there? Working with stakeholders and leaders to have that. What I would say is having the conversation around skills makes it easier with stakeholders. Everybody understands, and most people understand what a skill is. My dad's like a 70-year-old retired electrician. I can have a conversation with him around skills the same as I can with an executive member in the business. So that's a good idea. So I got the right skills framework in place, and the challenge was then to think about how to actually deliver the content and have a good experience that people would return to and that was relevant for them. It didn't go as well as I hoped initially, and this film, I don't know if anybody recognises it, it's a film called The Irishman. It's a classic Martin Scorsese gangster film, just for nearly 4 hours, I think. And in terms of looking at how to deliver content initially, it was very much about looking at our skills taxonomy and matching that with the skills taxonomy of our provider. So for example, if we've got change management, you match that with change management from LinkedIn Learning and it pulls through all of that content. And I did that and I asked for the readout to say, I just need a bit of a look before it goes into the system and we launch it to have a look what it is. And there were about 20,000 items in there, content items, in various languages and across various skills. So I spent 4 hours watching this film in the background, going down a spreadsheet and putting a Y or an N next to various content items to push them through. And I got it to a point which was kind of okay, massive improvement from what we had before. You know, the content was in one place at least. I was running this alongside user experience workshops to make sure the interface worked for people as well. But I started hearing from our employees, again, continuing to listen to them, that there was too much content. So the next step was to understand how I could actually bring this down into a content set which would work for people and where they could easily find what they needed. So that was when, again, I went back to Filtered to have a conversation with them. And thinking about how we could optimise the experience around it. This film is quite an old one, I Wrote Up. It was a Will Smith film, but I probably shouldn't have a picture with him in it at the moment. But it was important to think about how I could do things differently, and I didn't have the answer for that, essentially. I'd heard about AI but I didn't really understand what it did. But I knew that Filtered had a good AI engine that sits behind their platform. So I was interested to speak to them to see if I could kind of pull that AI engine out and use that to help with our problem. And I gave them a set of parameters. So again, I looked at user behavior, what are our users and learners actually looking at. They're looking at short content, they're looking at a lot of videos. And giving them parameters around, if we've got all of these vendors, then I want 5 or 10 items per skill, per language, I want a mix of vendors, etc. And they were able to then put that into their curation machine. And I've got to say the results were amazing. I think we took the content items down from, I don't know, maybe 15, 20,000 to probably more about 5,000. Really succinct amounts. And instantly started hearing from employees that was a better experience. They could find what they wanted to find, which was amazing. I think just considering what are the kind of really key things to summarise from that. First of all, being really clear on the problem you're trying to solve in the KPIs. I actually get asked quite a lot about how do you measure the impact of what you've done, and that's again, like we always ask that question, aren't we? My KPIs actually around the problem that we have was it's too expensive what we're doing, and people can't find what they need to find. And I've got data points from our engagement survey verbatim to follow up. So that was actually my measurement. It was really around those, can I fix those problems and those data points? So I can't tell you if the ROI, is that I can tell you it costs less to run it now, and it's more sustainable because I get those curations through from Filtered on a quarterly basis when content has been refreshed or revised or repeat, and it's a couple of hours work to make sure that it all looks good and it works for us. Throughout, continuing to test and take feedback from the employee base. I might have a view on what I think is working and not working, but actually it's those guys who will tell me whether it is or not. Less is more, really, really important. I think I started with a view initially of I'm worried that people won't have enough content on there to find what they need. And I quickly reversed that when I started speaking to people here, people feel really, really important. I was definitely constrained by my own thinking, doing the whole taxonomy match. So going to people who've got more expertise and they think differently, really important for me. As well as still needing the human touch. There still needs to be a little bit of validation as to what's actually come out of that AI engine when they do the curation. And that means it's also more sustainable from a cost perspective, as well as a skills perspective. Thank you very much.
I still think one of my favourite parts of all of that when we talked before you came here was you sitting watching the Martin Scorsese in the background going through 20,000 points on an Excel spreadsheet and thinking in a different way. So from both of us, I'm going to throw it out to the audience in a second and start just asking some questions. So before we do that, overall, your learning, your experience from this, your use of AI, a couple of words on those questions.
I think I didn't really understand what it could do. I think I've now got, certainly from what I've done, a practical understanding of what it does, and that would be the big difference for me. I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff that I don't know about as well, but I can actually start thinking about how I can apply it.
And was the practical application very different from how it was hypothetically for you?
Yeah, it's still an interesting area because I don't really know how it's working, but isn't that interesting that we use it, and it's that thing that we all as humans like to understand how something works. So I have had to trust something that it will work, and I had to come with stakeholders to invest to trust it as well. I think that's been quite interesting to go through.
It's definitely not run by magic pixels.
As far as I'm aware, it could be.
There's a tendency. Overall, your learning and your thoughts from this.
What I was hoping to achieve was a level of efficiency, right? in both adapting to a learner's knowledge and experience, but creating broader efficiencies as well. Like what was the impact on my team? How was this going to help them? Because this technology is efficient enough, were we able to take that very precise learning that you do in disease state and free up their time to actually do other things? It's kind of that whole notion of, like the iRobot slide that you put up, right? That's the great fears, the robots are taking over. But what it's actually done, it helps you determine where AI fits and where the human resource needs to be within the learning. So that was really clear for me through this.
Questions. What questions do we have straight up there, Teresa? I think we've got a microphone. Got a microphone here.
I've got a couple of questions. They're both very different. The first one is, how has that changed the way you operate as learning and development professionals? And what was that mind shift like for you both as well? So I'll ask that one first and then I'll ask the other one.
What's interesting, and I think there was a talk earlier, David Kelly gave earlier, and he talked about that shift in learning and development away from being, creating workshops to really execute trainings to becoming learning consultants for the organization. So that's very clear to me, right? And it's clear to a lot of the people who buy into everything that we're doing, right? Who can really see what this has done to shift what we're doing within a learning culture. We talk about learning culture, we talk about being a learning organization, and I think a lot of us have those conversations. But what's become really clear is this is the type of thing that's going to allow us to do that, right? So the shift has been really into that learning culture.
I think doing a piece of work which was truly data-led, I don't think I've done a piece of work which was actually as data-led as that before. And going through that and the conversation I was able to have with stakeholders around that was very, very different to conversations I've had before, where you've essentially got, we've all had 10 people in the room and you've got 2 or 3 different perspectives and you're trying to manage and influence it in the room. And it wasn't like that. And that's interesting that that happened because the data was very, very clear. There was still subjective opinions. People said, I want to call something a different name for this, but that doesn't really matter as such. So I think that's been a big change and has definitely changed the way I work actually. For sure, I go to the data first and see what's available and go from there.
Teresa, I'm gonna ask somebody else to ask a question and come back to you. Is that okay? So who would like to go next? So we've got the gentleman in the front here and a lady behind Teresa after that. Hiya.
Thank you both. All 3 of you, in fact. Why not? Thank you.
Oh, hiya.
Both of you kind of mentioned, well, Sue, explicitly objectivity and almost sort of outsourcing that objectivity to artificial intelligence. But I'm a bit sort of troubled by that because we know that there's bias problems within artificial intelligence models, the sets that they're trained on. And do you have any concerns about that? To be clear, I'm a big fan. I'm learning how to program AIs and things like that, so I'm totally into it. But I'm also super conscious that we might be, given our keynote today, we might be filtering out diversity when we're chasing some sort of objectivity that may not really exist in that space.
I'm glad you asked that, actually, because it's not, we don't rely on it only. That's not the only thing that we rely on. We rely on it as another measure to layer on top of it. And when the technology we're working with can pull questions out for you, so you don't have to, like, if you want to test somebody on a novel, let's say, it can take chapters of that novel and pull out questions that help to steer the learner to mastery of that knowledge. But we don't rely on that alone. There's always, like, I do it in disease states, so someone from medical or whoever the brand manager is always going through it as well. So it's partnered, the objective element that the technology brings is partnered. So it's not relied on its own.
Yeah, similar. So I would always still have human touch. involved. I think that needs to be, from the work that I've talked about there, still needs to be included, to have a lens over the work that's been done. But I do agree, we all need to be aware of it as development professionals or tech professionals, or whatever it might be, to design and manage it.
And the data that comes out for both of you, so I think I had in my head when I started talking to you both, that it was almost, you ended up with some sort of Amazon type, here, you went on this course, other people, here's the next course that we recommend. Is that kind of coming into it? Because that could have bias, that could have, no.
We don't, because there is that.
You're not using it in a predictive way,
No.
You're very much using it with the data that you've already got.
There could be implications for that moving forward. We haven't used that yet. Like, well, I see it in my LinkedIn Learning, right? I have a personal account, and it'll suggest for me, here's a course based on some of your interests, and I'm not interested in that, right? So that doesn't happen all the time, of course, but yeah, we don't do the predictive part of it. No.
We started doing that when we launched the Experience platform. We had conversations around the echo chamber. That's kind of what we're getting at. And we launched recommendations based on people or behaviour in the system, and we actually stripped it out. We got told that people didn't like it, and they actually like to be able to just search. So we had all these amazing gadgets that we probably spent lots of money on, and we launched it for 3 months and then ripped them all out, and it's just now about searching for the content you want.
So talk to me a bit about why they didn't like it. What was going on there?
I think most of the feedback was around probably more around the clutter side of things than anything specific around echo chambers or how all of the different stuff.
This is when everyone's getting creeped out. Like, what do you think I'm going to do?
This is scary.
Even Amazon, who are like probably the best at it, like a year ago I bought like a Hoover, and like then every time I went to Amazon it was like, this boy loves Hoovers.
And you're buying more than one.
Yeah, exactly. He needs more Hoovers. Put Hoovers in front of him. So it's not.
Sounds like the machine learning has some learning to do with this. Thank you so much for your question.
I think if I can just add one thing to that, sorry, Julie. This is something that I'm seeing is going to, because there is that balance between that Netflix model or Amazon's model, and the people really didn't like it, so they want to search. So I think what we really need to tap into as even a skill set within, because there's a tremendous amount of information out there available to everyone. For me, somebody who has expertise in content curation, because people want what's available to them. But if you give them 15,000 offerings or far too many Hoovers, you're going to lose that person's engagement, right? So there needs to be a balance between the searching and not making too much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, yes. So you're both in the pharmaceutical industry, so obviously efficacy is a big word for you, and learning efficacy is fairly new in a way. And I found it quite curious that in your KPIs or how you measure impact, there wasn't much about long-term measurement. And so how do you know that learning actually works, other than it's engaging and it's just in time? But what about long-term impact?
Yeah, so I think from this work and this particular program, again, it was looking at what are the important metrics and measures that we wanted to focus on. So consumption of content is really important to what people are consuming. That obviously doesn't tell you about how people are applying it, right? That's clear, it doesn't. I think in that, I still don't believe I've come across anything, frankly, in the past 5 years since I started working with more broad L&D that's really convinced me about how you can easily do that and improve causality. I do think that when you start any kind of program from an L&D perspective, if you are led by the data, you should have some data points in there which will tell you if that program has been successful or not. That would be a way that I would look at it, which might be some business metrics rather than those metrics.
And I stood up because I'm a very fidgety person, and I was going to keep fidgeting.
Keep
So I-
fidgeting, that's totally fine.
Keep
I
fidgeting.
I may be over there to join you. I'm also drag part number 2.
And the light's not right in my face. I'm a big fan, like, yes, the data points are necessary, the measurements are necessary, and we do always have an eye to how sustainable is this, and what is it going to do to help us in the long run. A big piece of being able to free up some of my team's time to focus on other skills-based consulting learning is a huge one, but then also sort of for the learner as well, right? So level of engagement is really important. And we can see, I'm a big fan of experimentation. So what I love to do is say, hey, we have this great idea that we've come up with, and I will actually ask for volunteers to participate in something. I tend to I'm drawn to enthusiasm in this, right? So I may ask for a group of 10 people who want to just be a little bit ahead of everyone else. Maybe they start, depending on the project, maybe they start 2 weeks ahead of people, maybe they start 6 months ahead of other people. Just sort of get some information there, and you can iterate on what you're offering them from there. That answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Other questions? So, what else is going on in there? Has anyone begun this process? Is anyone in this process? You are? You're thinking about it. Okay. And so what's the? Are you sort of looking for something from this? What are you taking?
For me, I have two questions.
I'm going to start.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about it. I probably have two questions. And my first perception, there is two components related to that is identifying the AI engine you're going to use, and then build up the data that's going to feed that engine. Now, if I miss one of the steps, important, please correct me. And then, so my question, thinking about the data you have to build to feed that engine, if there is any tips, because somewhere, if at first thought, it feels like it's huge undertaking.
Sure.
And that's kind of like, okay, how do we get started?
Okay. So let's break that down. So there's the question about how do we get that started. It sounds like there's also a question about how do you choose your vendor? What are the sort of criteria, the things that sit around that are going to help you? And then we can work from there. Okay. Do you want to start?
Sure. A big part for me with choosing the vendor was being in this industry for a considerable amount of time. I've seen a shift even in how vendors interact with us. It used to be you'd have the great big proposal from someone, and they would come in and it would cost X amount of dollars, and they would want to keep their expertise for themselves, right? And so you sort of would rely on them, right? Which is a consulting model for sure. What I'm seeing more of now, and a big part of what made me comfortable with the technology is beautiful, right? That's great, and it gives us what we need from the effectiveness perspective. But they really were interested in partnering with us. So what they do is respond very well to, we think this might be an interesting thing to try, and they can bring that in, or they can counsel us on that and try to experiment on something with us. So a big part of vendor selection for me went obviously being super impressed with the look and feel of what it is they're offering you, and how comfortable do you feel with them? Do you see yourself having a sustained relationship with them? And the answers for those with us with Sana were absolutely yes. So that, and the other piece for me is always start with a small group, right? Get a little group of really invested people in the organization involved quickly, and then use that to sort of decentralize your messaging around what it is you want to achieve with this.
So the decision making was the look and feel and relationship.
Yeah. In addition to the technology itself and what it could bring to us for sure.
Okay, but the sort of algorithm that's sat underneath it, obviously, well, I'm not saying obviously, but I'm guessing there's a lot of exploration about that and the biases around it.
We talked to a lot of different people, and this company stood with us.
What about yourself?
Yeah, I've not got too much more to add. I think what Sue talked to. I spoke to a network to ask people who are the really good guys in this space. This is our problem that we have. Who can do it? And most people sent to speak to them. So I didn't really do a lot of conversation with other vendors, quite frankly, because they knew their stuff. What I would say is the partnership element. That's the same with any partner that our supplier that we work with, but they were particularly good. I would go with a problem, of which there were many as I went through, and they just kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, no problem. It was a really nice partnership.
Thank you. All right, other questions? What are we not covering here? What's not been asked? Gentlemen back here. Hold on, can you just wait 1 sec, we'll get a mic to you. Especially if you're going to ask us something nice and controversial. You can give them a little bit of hassle, you know. Like, we don't have to, I mean, we can be nice, but we don't be too nice. So if you're sitting there with a scratchy question, do ask it. I'm saying that, I'm just getting you on the spot. I don't have to answer it.
Hello. I was curious about cognitive mapping for content, and we're looking at AIG for psychometric in terms of measurements, but I'd also like to be looking at like content and cognitive mapping to match with machine learning to more personalize that. And if you could walk through if you have that process or experience for that.
We haven't, for us, we haven't really gotten to that point in terms of the cognitive mapping. That's something we're looking at doing, but we're not at that point.
Sorry, just repeat the question for me.
Just, I'm very curious if you have experience with cognitive mapping when it comes to content. So like now we're looking, for like obviously for measurement, like final measurement of psychometric, but looking at just the personalization of the content in training content and to map content and use machine learning in that regard to see if we can generate more content in our e-learns and other modalities, and just if there's a cognitive mapping process that you've been through. For that type of personalization.
Yeah, I don't think I know what cognitive mapping is.
I'm not sure I do. So when you say cognitive mapping, what does that mean within your organisation?
So if you were looking at users in a specific workflow that they needed to understand and apply X, Y, Z, and they need to know X, Y, Z, what are the decisions that they need to make in that workflow?
So the decision-making process, so you're trying to map their thinking process, kind of cognitive
exactly.
mapping.
Which has started to be seen in the medical field in terms of what information doctors and other medical professionals need to use, but I have not seen it in other areas outside the medical field.
Something we started having conversations about, like even if we identify, let's say you're in a researcher role, right? And these are the core competencies associated with the researching role, and you need to, show this level of proficiency within them. So we've talked about that, but it's really abstract for us at this point, because the second piece for that, and what does the measurement of that look like over time, right? So I can illustrate that this exercise we've done has actually given you greater competency within that set of skills. We've only talked about it.
I think that's
but
what
I'd
most people are only talking about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gentleman here, and with the shirt, and then a gentleman here.
They're planning
And
purposely
also,
far away.
anyone on the side of the room, at the moment, you're letting us all down over here. So just know that we're watching you all. So, gentleman here. Hiya.
Hi, good afternoon. I know I have a customer coming up fairly soon who is very traditional IoT deliverer of training. Their hierarchy, understandable to move to a more enhanced opportunity. How did you de-risk your transition from an ILT structure to a more sort of enhanced structure? And how did you sell the additional costs?
I can do the cost one quickly because that was really easy to illustrate that we actually saved money by doing it. So upfront cost was more so, but over the period of a year, because you're able to I'm able to redistribute my resources differently, it wound up being more cost savings.
So your 60% saving of bums on seats over a period of time.
Bums and seats is not a great measurement, right? So, but that's what we use in L&D is how many people showed up and how many people finished. I'm not sure either of those are terribly informative. But then the whole instructor-led training versus, something, observing adult learning principles more so. It's funny because we were actually talking about this just before we started. It's almost like L&D is in this huge transition right now. You hear a lot of companies, even traditional companies, talk about wanting to be a learning organization or bringing a learning culture into the organization. But I think they still view L&D as the workshop creating people who are, delivering this for them. So I think part of it for us became, and I still have resistors, even in our, in people who talk about wanting to have a learning organization, but actually what that looks like. So I think it's a lot of change management over a fairly long period of time. But that's where going to those enthusiastic people who maybe you do a pilot with something on a particular topic, and then you get your enthusiasm diffused further throughout the organization. Because you do have early adopters who want to come along with you quite quickly. And you can rest just in adult learning principles too, right? It's not effective to have adults sit down for 2 weeks straight. They're not engaged. They're not going to learn.
No, it's a military customer, and trying to change their mindset is often a challenge.
Well, withdrawal answers.
So it's just like a little ripple, annoying ripple happening there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go to Martin, and before we come to you, sir, I'm starting to do this thing in my head about like how much money do you need, but so.
Looking at what the skills that we need and what the content providers needed and what people actually were using. I didn't need all of that content, so there was a saving to be had, which you can estimate, as to what that might be. And I think the other piece of it which talks to the engagement. When you can start to show the consumption figures versus the cost overall of what you're investing in, it starts to be a much more attractive investment proposition from leaders of the organisation.
I suppose that's heavily dependent on the scope and the size of the target audience. If
Yes.
you've got a very minute target audience, like fighter pilots, for instance, against a GSK type style 100,000 strong, then those cost savings come quickly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So as we're talking, I am curious about, do you need, I think my question is something like, do you need a baseline of decent technology in order for this to work? So I'm just thinking about some of the clients that I work with are in very different spaces with their technological infrastructure in the first instance, right? So some of the companies that are not necessarily, have a lot of money or maybe charities or so, what's your view on that, about what your baseline technology needs to be in order to use this well?
I can talk a little bit to my experience. The most challenging thing I think that we've got as L&D professionals, and that we're still going through at the moment at GSK, is being able to access the data to actually say, this is why it's a problem, and not just from a development perspective, but a commercial perspective or a business perspective. That isn't easy. We still outsource a lot of our capability around that because we just don't have it in-house. I think having systems such as Workday or SAP or Salesforce can give you some of that. It depends on, again, the business problem that you're trying to solve as to whether you've got the systems in place. And then I think when you start stepping into more HR systems or comm systems, which then might help you to be able to understand the effectiveness as to whether people are actually looking at it. So whether it be sentiment analysis to be able to analyse, what people's behaviour is on the workplace, if the campaigns that you're running are being successful, whether it be around what you can pull out of your intranet systems or your experience platforms to be able again to understand what people are doing, what is the behaviour, to help you shape the experiences that you're providing.
I think for me, one of the things that was really important, because there are a lot of existing technologies, right, that we have or that anybody would have, but a certain degree of automation, right? So the biggest thing for us was looking for something that would have some flexibility, that would be able to incorporate our existing systems and be able to pull data and information from those systems. So the big thing for me is flexibility.
Afternoon. I think this might have been answered a couple of minutes ago, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's a GSK specific question. You're talking about filtered the curation algorithm, let's say, to take 20,000 learning objects down to 5. Is that it curated in the surface level? You've still got the other 15,000 sitting in the background that you're still paying for, or is that you actually only now pay for 5,000?
Oh, blimey. You don't want to speak for that one. That's a great question.
So we had an interesting kind of architecture of what we created in GSK. So we had our learning experience platform, and to answer your question directly, when I used the algorithm to curate, all people could search for what I curated. We had some additional curation happening outside of that, which were very specific things. So it meant that actually the total number was somewhere around about 70 or 80,000 that we had content access that we had initially. So they weren't available on the platform. You could get that content if you went directly to LinkedIn Learning or to Get Abstract or to Harvard. But actually, and I think this was referenced a bit earlier, what it allowed me to do was to say, actually, I don't need all of that content. So can I rethink my contracting with the suppliers that we use the content to save some longer term?
Thank you. I suppose from economies of scale and that perspective, GSK are obviously a big company. You've probably got a fair bit of leverage, however you say, with them to talk about that. But no, it's a very practical sort of, if you've got a similar sort of thing, it's interesting that you effectively hid it.
Yeah.
You can still get it if you really want to, but you've hidden it, which gets around the more is less and less is more.
It does.
Hidden it based on data. You weren't, you were hiding the stuff that looked like it wasn't being used.
Correct, that's exactly right. And I think the other lens that I put on that is when we started looking at this, because when I came into the role, I kind of said, this is going to be bonkers. You've got these 3 platforms with content over here, and we're launching another one. Is this not just going to confuse people more? And that was a concern for us all the way through. But actually, what we found was more mature learners, they can kind of navigate their way around generally. And if, they know they'll be able to go to LinkedIn and find something different if we haven't provided it. But what our platform is right is probably for less mature learners, it's an easier way to find what they want.
We had a customer.
Yeah.
Yes. So just let's do the thing, and then we're going to go back to that leader with it, and then we're going to go back to Teresa.
So basically, one of the things I took from it is you didn't talk much about your LMS or your LEPs, and I know you both come from large organisations, so my sort of understanding was that maybe they'd be more bespoke as opposed to some of the more common elements such as Moodle or some of the more common LMSs and authoring tools. And I think like you were talking about technology and how when focusing on AI or machine learning that you would possibly rethink your approach to what technology, what vendors you were using, so on and so forth. And you were mentioning sort of having multiple vendors, and your talk led a little bit for me more along the sort of video-based learning pathways. So in your research and your experiences, could you initially say, do you have like bespoke LMSs, LEPs where they're sort of in-house built and that allowed you to incorporate more technologies and work with more, or were there some sort of leaders such as Moodle, for instance, that these kind of technologies could be incorporated with on a bit of a higher level as opposed to having to sort of work your own machine learning into your authoring tool?
Wow. So that's very specific. So that it sort of interface between your LMS and
That was part of, for us, what we were looking for, something that would be able to integrate with anything. Not that we're integrating currently, the only thing we integrate with is LinkedIn Learning at the moment, but to be able to layer on top of whether it's Workday or I'm not familiar with what you mentioned actually, but that you would be able to layer on top of something else. So, because that's one of the chief, I guess, grievances is there's too many different places to go, right? So you want to be able to have one place integrated. So in my hope in the future, and it's achievable. How long it takes us to get there, I'm not sure what that's going to take. But that was it for me, is looking for something that would layer onto any system we have.
most as what you used, or what you
Sorry.
was it like I say a bespoke system, or would you signpost a particular offering?
It could be either. Yeah, it can be either.
I'm going to go to this lady over here again. Sarah, can you just pass that over? And then, like I say, anyone else that wants to go and burning questions, what we need. So we'll go with this lady, then Teresa, and then you do that. Yeah.
Quick one. You mentioned earlier that it could be magic powering the platforms. How much do you care what the underlying technology actually is, and how much do you want to understand what is the AI? Because some of the things you said, and I appreciate you can't share the details, could well be solved simply with maths, with a really good algorithm that's necessarily AI driven. So how much do you need to understand that this is AI, and what sort of evidence are you after, if any?
Oh, this is
Sorry,
that's
this
just coming
is
up here.
a good question.
It's a great question.
So, my take on this is the problem I had to solve, I didn't have the capability to be able to do it myself, and I didn't have anybody within our organisation who could do it. So, it was as simple as that. I needed somebody to help me to deliver this. It still feels a bit weird that I don't know, how it's working, especially with the lens that you put on that. I think that's really, really relevant to consider. But as long as I'm working with somebody I trust, they appear to be doing the right things. We've got some human intervention there to make sure the quality is good, and we're trying to address any bias. I'm less concerned about the fact that it might be quite simple actually what they're doing. That doesn't really matter to me because it's delivering what I need it to deliver.
I think for me, it really, because there's an authoring feature that we can have. We can take on. We have not done this at this point. Is take on the authoring of course content ourselves within the platform. So nobody's going to become a data scientist overnight in terms of the program or getting to this. But I think there is. If we're relying on this type of technology, there is a need to understand the fundamentals of it. And that's just maybe me never having enough information about everything. So we have lots of varying degrees. Obviously, our IT department needs to understand it incredibly well because of things like risk assessments that speak to privacy and legal issues, et cetera. But it's a fundamental knowledge of what it is we're doing. There's some great courses actually for LinkedIn that help with understanding fundamentals of AI, which would be.
And I genuinely thought we were going to get more questions about that stuff, about things like security, about things like the ethics around it, about the data around it. So, thank you very much. Can we have from Teresa and then this will get back, and then I think that might be us done, unless if anyone has like a really burning one, particularly again if you're going to challenge them, I think go for it. But apart from that.
I wonder if you could give a brief example of where it fits into, say, a particular project or program that you're delivering. So, is it a larger component? Is it a small component? But really, a bit more of detail around a case that you could expand upon. For the use of it. So, where might it have been applied as part of, say, a broader program, or is it there as I search and I find things? Is it purely that, or do you use it specifically for a change program?
So, in terms of how AI we're talking about, that's what.
Yeah, so the tools itself. So you might use that as a component of where there might be some face-to-face, where there might be some social learning, etc. So where do you then be more directed, I suppose, for them to go and use that approach?
So we're using it in this context at the moment. So I don't use AI in any of the programs that we've currently got. I do think there are opportunities probably to use it, but yeah, just this context.
We use it with. We have one program that we do that touches everyone in the organization. That was a new program. But then if we're looking at things like disease state knowledge, anybody working in a given space, let's say diabetes, for example, anybody who works in that space needs that knowledge, so that would touch, sort of that whole group. So it is, the use of it is very broad right now. In terms of employees, not in terms of projects. We just have a few right now.
And I do think as well, sorry, it's not to catch up on the question. I do think as well, so you're talking about specific needs here, how can we use it for that? Yeah, so I think it would depend on the cost of using it, is probably my answer to that actually. So if I've got a specific need to curate content, I suspect I could do it, or somebody in our team could do it quite quickly, rather than having to employ the AI to do it because they would be involved.
All right, very last question. I'm just really conscious as well, like there's things happening outside, which means, yes, the city means we're going over. The city here. There's things happening outside, which means people will start to be thinking about cups of tea already. So we're just going to pay it.
This is a very straightforward question for Martin. I don't think you mentioned which LXP you're using, did you?
I didn't.
Are you not allowed to?
I think I'm allowed to.
I mean, yes, you mentioned it. And I have specific reasons.
No one's tweeting.
So we use SuccessFactors LMS, and we use SAP Jam for our LXP mixes over the top. We have customized it as much as it can be customized to make it a reasonably good experience.
So the reason I you mentioned that the recommendations engine, you've switched that piece off because you found the feedback. What was it using to push those recommendations that just cluttered the space? And I asked that because we're busy piloting recommendations on that platform.
And you guys can talk about this afterwards as well. If you want to, that's going to be useful.
Yeah, we can catch up but I think we're certainly using recommendations from other people. And I believe there was a very basic engine in there which would look at the content you were consuming and would recommend based on that as well.
Okay. That's really what I was looking for.
Was there one very, very last question? Right, this is us, we're out actually.
Thank you. No, mine's very
no
quick.
No pressure, but this needs to be like...
It's very tight. I just want to know the size of your L&D team just to have a better context for all questions you answer today.
It changes every year, right? I think at the moment we probably have in our Centre of Excellence team probably about 20 people, and that doesn't include anybody in manufacturing, which has a huge base.
If I talk about just Canada, Canada is, well, geographically large, not a big country. We're 4 people, but we also have students, and we have people in other roles in the organization who will join us in gigs. So they'll spend a period of time with us where they're just working on a specific project or something.
Thank you.
All right. Can I just say thank you very, very much. I think it's quite straightforward to stand up and do 20 minutes worth of slides and only a few minutes of questions. This lovely pair have done very few slides and have answered questions for me left, right, and centre. So for both of you, thank you so much. I hope you appreciate it. Go and get cups of tea, stretch, go down to the exhibition, have good fun, and we'll see you later.